topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the host and their guests, and not those of W4CS Radio, its employees, or affiliates. W4CS makes no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening to the Cancer Support Network on W4CS.com.
Hi everyone, it's Arthi with Light Up Your Life, and hope that you are doing well. And I'm really excited to be with you all today. I know the last couple of weeks have been some pre-records for a variety of reasons. Some for me and some for our guest. Of course, sometimes when you plan a little bit too far in advance, things come up for people and things change. And also when I always say sometimes it's just like the right amount of planning. Of course, this coming from someone who doesn't always plan very well, but so I'm really excited to be with you all today. Actually, my daughter was asking me to come to lunch, and I said I want to be on my podcast, and it's been a while, and so this funny conversation we were having this morning. She's like, "Can't you do another recording?" And I'm like, "I think we've done enough of those." So glad to be here live with you all. And of course, for those of you who will be watching later. And I'm a little heavy right now. Earlier, I was running some errands, and my girls have a Girl Scout camping trip. So I got this rain poncho in the Dollar Tree, and I witnessed there were two folks who were coming in. They were just so angry with each other. I think something happened in the parking lot where somebody got really close. They were yelling at each other, and I got really emotional when I was in line paying for this rain poncho. And I said to the checkout person, sometimes your heart gets so heavy thinking about the trials and tribulations that people go through, and that where that anger on that iceberg sits on and what it's masking. And so I just couldn't think of a more perfect time than to have our guest today, Dorothy Hussein, who is and I have to ask her if I'm pronouncing her last name correct. We'll get some confirmation. But she is a licensed marriage family therapist with extensive experience working with trauma. What I always love is when people go into, especially therapists and counselors, where they do their own work and they become very aware of what it's been like in their own journey to deal with their trauma, so that they do have that lens on how it feels to walk and accompany someone alongside their journey. And so I think this is just such a fitting time today to have this conversation. And her approach as a mind-body psychotherapist or a therapist is really, really what I love, is that idea if we can really bring that mind-body connection, which is so critical. And that's what she does in her work. She's an author, so we'll be talking about her book here called Breaking the Chains of Transgenerational Trauma. So she shares her story as well. The subtitle is My Journey from Surviving to Thriving, which is what we want for ourselves and, of course, for our members of our family and our society. And so we'll be taking a dive on the idea of what I like. Can't wait to ask her questions about how she really loves to work at this root of past traumas, not only for the individual, but then that systemic family. And then also what is in our ancestral lineage when it comes to trauma, which I hugely believe is a big component that we carry in our bodies as well. So really excited about her approach on how all this work comes into play for her and how it manifests itself, of course, in her life. So author, speaker, awesome therapist, and we'll find out more about her as she comes on. So welcome to the show today, Dorothy.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for that introduction. I'm looking forward to talking to you too.
Yes, thank you. So, real quick story. Not many, some people may know. I never got my clinical license just yet. We'll see what happens because it was always a few hours off here and there. And so I just am so excited to have another person in the profession who really believes in that mind body,
Mm-hmm.
that really that integrative piece on looking at things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're going to become a therapist as well?
I don't know. It's so funny. I just had another contract opportunity, and she's like, I can't believe you haven't gotten your hours yet, and let me try to figure out a way. And because, in terms of her just wanting to help coach me along and trying to figure out how I can, because I'm doing all the work, I just don't account for the hours sometimes, what she's telling me. So I
Oh,
was telling her she should have a coaching program for some for individuals who want to get licensed, because I
yeah.
think if I had known some of the things she was telling me, I probably would be done years ago. I just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a mindful 20, no, 30 plus year old or whatever I was at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds like you're really close. You just need maybe a little help to get over the.
That's right, that'll boost. But we'll see what happens.
Okay,
As you and
good.
I both know, it is all about wherever the winds call to work, who you encounter and who you get to
Mm-hmm.
work with. Okay, Dorothy, enough about me. I really want to find out about you. So, and so does our audience. So can you share with us just where do you live, and um, you know wherever you want to start in this trajectory, your own trajectory, how you got here, what your belief system is on this mind body connection, and trauma is a really big word. So if you want to help unpack it a little bit, I think it holds a lot of um,
Sure.
connotation, denotation, and I think we need to really start. And I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like especially lately we just use it a lot, but then we don't really,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, it
Yes.
is a very complex, and it can be used very generally. So yeah, my name's Dorothy Houston. I live in Southern California, Riverside, California, which is in between LA and San Diego. I was born in Hawaii to immigrant parents. My dad's parents immigrated from Okinawa. My mom immigrated from the Czech Republic after World War II. So my world looked very different. My childhood looked very different from my parents' childhood. Um, and then we moved as a family to Southern California when I was 7. And that happened right after a sexual assault on me when I was 6. So that was pretty important in my timing wise, I guess, in my journey in my childhood. And then grew up and have been in Southern California since. Um, my parents, just a little bit about them, because that's what my book's about, this transgenerational trauma.
Mhm.
My parents had very tough childhoods, and plus the war, the experience in the war of poverty, and just abuse and struggling. My dad was actually raised in an orphanage for quite a few years. So um, by the time I came around, their lives had economically had settled. They were, I have 2 older siblings. They were stable, without family support, but we lived in Southern California, and it seemed like a pretty stable childhood from the outside. But internally in our home, there was just a lot of fighting. So a lot of fighting, and a lot of it has to do with their trauma that they never resolved. So one of the components of transgenerational trauma is trauma that goes unresolved, and trauma like that we can all relate to or understand. War is a trauma. Poverty, starvation,
Mhm.
sexual assault, not having parents, grief and loss, or unresolved grief and loss from not having parents. Those are big traumas, and my parents didn't resolve them. What they did instead, which kind of actually helped our family quite a bit, and I don't want to, come across as bashing religion,
Mhm.
but they became born again Christians when I was about 11, 12, 13, young teenager. And that really helped, like, kind of give our lives some structure, and it gave us a place to belong. They stopped fighting so much because they would fight like this
Mhm.
horrible fighting. I was always scared they were going
Mhm.
to kill each other. It was
Mhm.
pretty bad. So, but all that settled down when we started going to church, and they remained Christians their whole life. Um, but for me, what happened was, because I was a child, I saw the change. I felt the change. I felt much more secure in the family. Um, but it wasn't a real spiritual conversion for me. I just used these spiritual practices from what my parents told me, and I actually repressed all my trauma. I would call
Mhm.
it spiritual bypassing today. At the time, I didn't really know,
Mhm.
but I never dealt with anything from my childhood as either. I was taught by my parents, you move forward, you you know, the you're born again, you're a new person,
Mhm.
and and they're also from that generation where you just pick up your bootstraps and keep going,
Mhm.
work
Mhm.
hard, and you succeed, and that worked for them. But so this trauma just kept within my body, stayed in my body, and
Mhm.
I used intellect. I use spiritual practices of intellect to really escape, just escape out of my body, and I became more and more isolated, and I was scared of people, and at the same time I longed for close friendships,
Mhm.
like all human beings do. We long for
Mhm.
connection,
Mhm.
and I couldn't ever achieve it because I was so scared of people. And so um then much later in life, our kids were grown. um I had become very almost like dependent personality disorder, so dependent because of the role of Christianity. My role under the teachings of evangelical Christianity is to be my husband's helpmate. And I took on that role, and I was very, very dependent on him, and still with my mom too. I was still really attached to her, wanting to please her. And so he is an attorney, and he became too stressed from the job. I mean, I was kind of happy, just like, okay, you make all the money, and I'll just be your support. And
Mhm.
uh but he got to the point where he wanted to change careers
Mhm.
because of the stress. And luckily for me, I he decided we were going to become marriage and family therapists. And people always ask me, like, oh, that's so weird. Why would your husband decide what you were going to do?
Mhm.
Well, he always decided what I was going to do. It was our relationship.
Mhm.
So we went back to school, and I honestly didn't think I could become a therapist. I didn't have that self-confidence, but I was so scared that my husband would die of a heart attack. I decided to give it a try.
Mhm.
And that's when my healing journey began. because I was suffering from PTSD and didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
And I write in the book, of course, it's the first story in the
Mm-hmm.
book, how my therapist, for the very first time in my life, I found myself in therapy as part of the school requirement. And I froze. She
Mm-hmm.
tried to talk to me about my childhood. And it was like, a videotape playing, and then you hit pause.
Mm-hmm.
And I froze. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I couldn't, I dissociated
Mm-hmm.
because no one had ever asked me before about what happened to me. And then after a while, I came back into the present, and she suggested I start writing, or she told me I had post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that was the awareness that happened in that moment, because I was aware that on some level, I was aware that I had problems. I'd always realized I'd had problems, but my solution was always to pray, read my Bible, go to church.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only solution I knew that I had available to me, because also the Christian church that I belonged to really dissuaded us, or had a negative attitude towards counseling outside of the church. And that's a problem.
And very common, right?
Yes, very common problem. I think they're isolated,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to Christian counselors, who a lot of them aren't licensed, and even licensed therapists. I think they, if they're working within the church, they're still isolated and prevented from learning a lot of this new knowledge that we have available to us
Mm-hmm.
about the mind-body connection, and about our brain, how our brain develops through the relationship with our parents. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
Totally. And thank you for sharing. I think it's always when we start to realize how deeply it does go into that mind body. And that is you said chapter 1. I mean, it starts for our audience, Dorothy. I think you have PTSD, and then the silence, right? Post traumatic stress disorder, silence. And you can I can almost feel like I'm in that room where it's like this major processing, and then the use of that silence, as we call it, therapeutic silence, to allow you to have space to digest and to process what she experienced was all of this trauma that had not gotten a chance to have some resolution.
yeah, a lot of times I have to remind myself, as a therapist, when I'm working with clients, not to interject. Like,
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
quiet, let them process, be quiet, don't interject, because a lot happens when you have in it, somebody's there, that's watching you, that's witnessing what you're going through, but they're not adding input, they're not directing you. So I'm talking right now, like in therapy, me as the client, there's a lot going on inside my body and my mind. That's really therapeutic. It's helpful just knowing there's another person there that cares for me, that is watching me. Or what we call it holding space, but it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just reminds you, like, the power of what silence can do in any relationship. I think we're so filled with wanting to fill space with words. It's just the human condition until you have to tell your frontal lobe just to take a break and just stay present with that person, just with you being there with them. And lately I don't even think it's called holding space for someone, but you hold it together, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't think it's a matter of you, the therapist or the coach or the person who's helping the griever. I don't necessarily, I think you hold space together, because that I think is pretty powerful. So I do want to ask you a quick question to go back. You were saying, did you say that your therapist encouraged you to write? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes,
Oh, can you
she
tell?
said
Yeah, can you tell us more about that?
she realized that I couldn't speak,
Hmm.
and so, she talked to me about journaling. She said, "Have you ever journaled before?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I journal every morning because that was my quiet time with God. I would read my Bible, and then I would write about what the Bible says and what my thoughts were about the passage." And she said, "Well, maybe you can start writing about what happened to you, specifically about your childhood, um, instead of what the Bible, take some
Mm-hmm.
time to journal. Use that time that you have set aside every morning, but instead of writing about what the Bible says, just write about your childhood." And I at first I was like, "Oh, I can't do that." No, that's like that's my connection to God, I can't, replace it, but maybe I could add it on or add it in, and I said I would give it a try. And, once I started, it just started all, like, I couldn't stop. Once I started, it was a release and again, she would read what I wrote. So that felt like really validating for me. Like she was a witness to what I wrote. It wasn't just me. It was somebody else that's there with me reading what I wrote. And that's how I started to acknowledge what had happened and put it into words. I'd never put it into words before either. So, I still write to this day. I journal to this day. I find it easier to write
Mhm, mhm,
than to speak because, as a child, I had difficulty speaking. My mom was very controlling, and then the trauma actually, kind of shut down my speaking abilities.
mhm,
I wasn't a chatterbox. I was very, very, very quiet kid,
mhm.
and that was as a result of my trauma.
And Dorothy, thank you for bringing that up, because oftentimes one of the signs that we can often see sometimes with adolescents, they often say, right, is you'll have this, and I don't mean to use like bubbly enough, but that kid who's the extrovert always, and then suddenly they have this they start to a little bit of a shift in personality, right? And some people think, oh, it's about the attitude, or they're going through adolescence. But then we always have to look at that other lens of why there's been a dramatic shift, you know, and um and we do talk about energy shifts when we get lodged in our body, and with energy work we realize we do have blockage in our throat chakra when something has happened um that impacts our bodies and our mind, and then that blockage happens. um and it's a safety mechanism too, right? In some ways it's a defense mechanism that comes up. But I'm really glad you are mentioning this, because I think we always need to be aware of our children and our adolescents, to pay really strong attention to what cues they give, because they're not always going to vocalize for a variety of reasons. It's just not their primary way.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
what I teach, I don't work with kids. I'm
Hmm.
not real familiar with child therapy.
Hmm.
I have in the past when I first started, but what I found was I want to work with the parents,
Yes.
because the parents, um, a lot of times they can't see the shifts in their kids, what's going on with their kids because of their own issues.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, I can work with kids 1 day a week or
Mhm.
1 hour a week, but the kids are attached to their parents, and the parents have the most influence on their children if they can heal their own pain in their own past, their own traumas. If they can uh, learn to attune to themselves, then they can be a better parent for their child. They can see
Yes.
what's going on with their kids better.
Right.
Otherwise, there's blind spots. That's what
It's so
happens.
true. I love that you said that, blind spots for sure, right? When you don't get a chance to have that awareness. And I mean, I don't know what the percentage is. I always say it's like 80 to 90. When you have that 80 to 85% of awareness, it just starts to allow for that unfolding of things to happen. And it's so true. So, Dorothy, can you talk to us about when you'd identify in your own story about transgenerational trauma? How do people start to make sense of their family lineage in that regard, and what are the patterns that that, and I know this is a really broad question, but you know what would somebody say that they would want to look into when it comes to figuring things out, and where do they start if they're not necessarily going to therapy right away, or yeah, where do they start to
Mhm.
unravel a little bit? Excuse me.
Yeah, I guess you get curious. On a cognitive level or on a conscious level, you can start to see patterns. You can see patterns, like, especially if they're negative, if they have negative consequences, like,
Mhm.
um oh my gosh, I never thought I would be like my mom. I always told myself I would never parent like my mom, and here I am, having these outbursts, and I can't control it. Or, oh, I've somebody might mention, oh, you married your dad, don't you see your dad is, whatever the commonality is. So we do tend to repeat our traumas, our patterns, our generational trauma patterns. Sexual abuse gets passed on. It's repeated, not passed on, but it's repeated because it creates these blind spots. And so, my mom was sexually abused. I was sexually abused. There's a pattern. What can I do to prevent it? And so I think a lot of us are becoming more and more aware of these patterns from our childhoods, especially, if you know that your parents had a tough childhood. That's all you need to know. Like, there's trauma there, and if they've never processed it, then it's affecting you today. And the the key, of course, is to get in touch with the subconscious, or your body. Your body is your access point to all the subconscious, unprocessed trauma that's being passed on. So you can look at your parents' childhood. You can, if they're still alive, you can ask them about it. My dad wouldn't talk about his childhood, but my mom would. My mom talked a lot about her childhood. So you can gain information that way. What was your childhood like? What were your parents like? Did you feel like you could talk to your parents? Did you feel like your parents were there for you? Were um, nurturing for you? Were you, or were they out, did they have problems with alcohol or drug abuse? That's a red flag right there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And bring out some of the stuff that we never talk about. There's so many secrets, family secrets, that we're scared to talk about. that if we don't talk about it, it stays in the subconscious or it stays hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to healing is to bring it all out. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of your past.
Yeah. Yeah, I know shame and guilt play a huge role in how we make decisions to disclose, or lots of factors, or fear. But you're kind of reminding it doesn't go away, right? I think it gets lodged. I keep bringing up the iceberg effect. It just stays so deeply embedded in our bodies and in our spirits and our everything that it does, and then it does erupt.
Mhm.
That's all I could think about today when I was at Dollar Tree thinking about both of these. All I could think in my mind was that they were like they had reached that threshold of being so frustrated with the situation. But I just knew if I had sat down with, there was something that they probably had a setting off point, and that's what happens to us. It gets lodged and it doesn't have anywhere to go.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't go away. Yeah, it
No.
starts, the bonding that takes place between a parent and their child happens before we can speak, before we
Mhm.
develop language. We don't develop language until we're about 3 years old or so. And that's what the research is keeps showing us, is that this bonding pattern, or this way of feeling love and acceptance and belonging, it gets established before we can speak. So then our language is formed. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, about our childhood, the stories we tell ourselves is all based on this bonding that has been established without language. And that's called procedural memory or intrinsic memory.
Mhm.
And it doesn't go away. It's like really strong.
Mhm.
It's very powerful. It's
Yeah.
in your body. It doesn't go away.
It does not go away. You can wish it away. You can do whatever you want. And I say it over, you can run, but you can't hide from it, right? Like you can run all your life. Many people have,
Yeah, you can tell yourself,
you know.
stories, but um yeah, it doesn't go away. But you can change it.
Hmm.
You can connect to it. And because you have your body is always with you. And you can go into your body and access those memories through your body, and stop trying to figure it out in your mind. Stop trying to intellectualize what happened to you, and just get in touch with your body, which is where your procedural memories are, where
Hmm.
those deep bonding memories are in your body.
Dorothy, you're reminding me of one of those, the body keeps score, like that. For those of you who haven't, if you ever just want to do some with by Basil Van Kolk, I hope I'm saying again, I'm chopping up everyone's last name today, but really power, same concept that Dorothy is just referencing, this idea of body being body, just lodging of what she's talking about, procedural memory and those repressed, that stuff that just doesn't go anywhere. And Dorothy, what do you think about, like, while we're talking about this like concept of this trauma and how deep seated it gets? What is your reflection on how the role it plays in our overall health?
It's connected, definitely connected. Because what we know now about stress, well, there's been a lot of studies of the effect of stress on the body,
Mhm.
with the plethora of autoimmune diseases that are affecting so many of us today, myself included. That when your body goes into that threat response or gets activated, your all your nervous system, all the organs in your body um, are affected and thrown into that survival mode of fight, flight, freeze, or faint.
Mhm.
And so your skin changes, your eyes change, dilate, or I can't remember exactly, but your heartbeat goes up, your heart pressure, blood pressure goes up, your immune system shuts down, and your digestive system shuts down. All the energy runs into your hands and feet for fight or flight. And so without a parent there that you feel safe to connect to and help you calm your nervous system back down, little kids who stay in that fight, flight, freeze, or faint over years and years wears their body down. Your body gets worn down. So high blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, digestive problems, migraines, arthritis, asthma, these autoimmune disorders are all connected to chronic stress. It's the stress that continues on in your body. So like when I was little, maybe you can, some people can identify with this, is I was really quiet, very obedient, very compliant, and always thought of as the good girl. Um, and I like that. It kept me safe. Or I just enjoyed, all the love and attention I got for being the good girl. But internally, I was scared. So my the threat response system in my body was activated continually. And then you grow up and you don't have any relief. There's no relief. And so, as an adult, I have high blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome. I have all these health conditions that I'm learning how to manage, but it's been a lot of years building in my body that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think while we're on this subject, I think as we approach a new way, even in medicine, to look at integrative health, to really hone in on physicians being well versed in brain health and, really sometimes I think when the I can't even say it right. Biosocial so a psychological assessment that's done is not actually, like, many physicians don't really have access to knowing, or don't even ask, right? We have our family medical history, but we're getting into a point where we're realizing that chronic stress and all this research is showing the need for physicians to be well informed of that connection.
Yeah, and
Play a
it
role.
it is it's too bad because, you end up going, a lot of people with complex PTSD end up having a lot of doctors. So
Mhm.
going to the doctor continually. And if there was just one doctor that would recommend,
Oh my gosh, Dory. Oh, sorry. I literally had this conversation yesterday with someone who is facing autoimmune disease. So I'm like listening to you. I listened to her story yesterday and I'm like, none of them could figure it out. None of them want to figure. And then, and I'm not trying to bash the medical system, but as you know, when they don't know oftentimes, then they also are in a very much of a position that they should know everything. So then it's a very difficult navigation. But yes, you get stuck in the system of not knowing what the answer is. And yes, I'm glad you mentioned autoimmune disorders, IBS. I mean, the list can go on. The digestive, they're all related to chronic stress,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And the lodging, because it is a mind body. I mean, it's so clear now. We have all the evidence, um, and like
Yeah,
you
and
said, you're trying to make sense of it right now, is what you're saying.
yeah, it's also connected to self-care.
Mm-hmm.
How well we can choose healthy foods over fast food, how well we can just take care of our nutrition, our sleep, our cleanliness. It's related to our childhood, how our parents modeled for us self-care, how well we can say no to that extra glass of wine. It's related to this inability to connect to our body, and using substances to help us feel safe or help us feel loved or just happy. We want to be happy, and the best, healthiest way to be happy is through connection. Is through
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because a couple weeks ago, there was a children's birthday party that I've been to so many. Some of them have alcohol, some of them don't. Guess what? Everybody still ends up, I mean, sometimes parents are a little awkward, the ones who don't know each other. But at the end of the day, when they're watching their kid have fun and I saw the same level of people still enjoying being in a space, whether they were observing, whether they had some anxiety they didn't know what to do with because they couldn't, you know what I mean? But I still saw this really interesting space of how it was about connection, whether they were just watching their child, whether they were interacting, So I think you summed it up beautifully. It is about connectivity at the end of the day, and however it looks.
And that goes back to our initial bonding, when we bonded with our parents. If
It
our
always goes
parents,
back to that.
yeah, we go back to it. Because
It always goes back to that. I always say that's why I have really fallen in love with working with parents, because I'm like, this is exactly where we need to have all spectrums. We need you to be working with folks who really are in that area, especially with couples therapy, and hopefully that family in the system, and then we need some people on the parenting end, and we need some folks in the middle, and we need all hands on deck. And then some.
Yeah.
I wanted to share page 19 of your book on journaling, because another thing, I feel like everybody keeps throwing around journaling. Well, you should journal, and they'll be like, it's like the go-to buzzword. And many times, as you and I both know, writing can be really difficult. I've actually mentioned this so many times on this podcast that for very many people, it has some negative connotation going back to their own childhood with some teacher telling them that their writing sucked or whatever it is. So they have that memories, right? And so I love the fact when you bring up these steps, and I'm all a bit about like visually, like just little steps, and it makes it so easy to check off as we go up things. And so, just the idea that you bring up the fact of choosing to journal about something about yourself, so open-ended. And I think that the audience to just understand, like keeping it open-ended about yourself, like a feeling, a reaction, a behavior, some past event, and you say you want to explore, which really gives that space, which is great. And then you give permission, which I think we do have to give permission around journaling, about mentioning for writing as long as or as short as you wish, which is really about that ownership piece. And that is vital, because it's always like, you should go journal. And then somebody in their head thinks, oh, it's for writing for 20 or 30 minutes. But you give that permission, can be short as you want. And then you give permission to change topics, because it's like a run-on sentence sometimes, right? Like it's just the flow of everything, ebbs and flows, and you're allowing that. I think sometimes people think when people are journaling, it's like commas and periods, and no, there's a point where you get so pissed your pen is like really hard, and sometimes you're really sad, and there's going to be a tear that comes on your paper. So I think step 3 allows that, when you say there are not really any rules, which I always say too, no rules. And then you do say in step 4 to make it a daily practice, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's really an exploration of yourself. Get curious. One of the tragedies of trauma is that you don't learn how to play. A lot of my clients never experienced play. And a big part of the natural growth, our natural growth process is to get curious, to explore, to discover. And you really want to turn that lens inward to yourself and start exploring your own feelings, your own past. Get curious. Don't worry about the periods and the commas or the punctuation or the grammar. Sometimes when I'm journaling, I start a word and I just, I don't want to say that. Some of it is just writing down what you're thinking. Don't worry about grammar, punctuation. Let it get out of your mind onto paper, and allow the journaling to help you explore and discover. And it's you're the only one who exists in your body. You're the only one there. Don't be afraid.
Yes.
And see what happens. See what you discover. You'll be pleasantly surprised.
In that discovery phase. Well, Dorothy, I can't believe how much our hour went so quick. So can you tell us where can we reach you, and some parting thoughts, and why should someone pick up your book? I never asked this one, but I'm going to today. Why should somebody pick up your book?
Well, I've been told it's a really good read.
It's true.
And you won't be bored.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about me so much as I really wanted to write this book for you, to help you heal your own trauma, heal yourself, get to know yourself. And that's very powerful, because you, just like trauma gets passed from generation to generation, if you can heal your own trauma, you're passing on your healing. And you pass on your healing to your children, number one, and then to all other relationships. And you can find me on my website, which is my name, just dorothyhouston.com. And from there, you can, there's videos, there's my book, there's an online course, Reparenting Yourself. I'm writing another book right now called Reparenting Yourself. And it's going to be about the process that I've kind of developed myself, but using, of course, all the other techniques from mind-body therapies. And you can just call me, set up a get acquainted call to have a conversation and see if I can be of any help to you in your healing journey, because it's about you. It's about everybody doing their own work. And
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can't run from that. I always say, you can't run from that work either. It'll come find you. I always say that, right? It hunts you down. Yes. Y'all take a real, and it's, I know sometimes people are afraid of deep reads. This is not really long. It's a quick read. And then there's also images for those of you who are also visual. And so take a look, and thank you for sharing the news about your other book. I think that's such an exciting, really, I can't wait to talk to you about that reparenting, because that's so needed and so necessary. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being with us and our audience, and everyone. You know where to reach Dorothy. The banners are there, and thank you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
You as well. All right, everyone, have a great week, or whenever you tune in. Be well.